spoke last time about some of the work you're doing in the heart research space, and you left us on a cliffhanger of some developments you were doing in terms of being able to prolong the life of hearts from brain dead people. What's happened since we last spoke?
A lot. So, just as a bit of background, when you give an organ for donation, the person normally is what's called brain dead, and it's got specific legal criteria and medical criteria. But the act of brain death, let's say if you come off the motorbike, damages the brain so that you're not going to survive, but that releases a whole pile of hormones and nasty things that damage all the organs. So it's one of the most humbling things as a medic that I still get blown away with when people are watching their son or daughter dying in a bed and they just want something good to happen. They want to be able to give something so that they may have lost someone, but someone will benefit along the line. And they say, we want to donate some organs. And whilst it's still incredibly humbling, a lot of the time we have to say the organ is too damaged. Specifically the heart, so lungs can cope, but heart's just a bag of muscle. I should move this chair around a bit. Heart's just a muscle bag, so as you can imagine, the longer the heart lives without oxygen, the more it's dying off. So in this vast brown land that we have, you've got about 3 or 4 hours to get the heart from, let's say, Mount Isa to Brisbane, and each second the cells are becoming less and less functional. So currently the way transplant's done is the donor, the team goes out, retrieves the heart, puts it in a bag of ice, puts it in an esky. It's literally an esky. So you can use use it for the barbecue on Sunday, and you can use it for a heart transplant on Monday. And it's just sterile ice. And then you go as fast as you can to the next hospital. You've got 3 or 4 hours, but each second the heart's becoming dysfunctional, which is not a massive problem in Scotland because we don't have very far to go. So we started thinking, if we can take the heart out of the body and wash out the evil humours, so could we maybe make the heart last that little bit longer? So for 4.5 years, we reckon it's about 52,000 man and woman hours in the lab where we created a brainstem dead model and then took the heart out, did the same thing with surgeons, intensivists, cardiologists, just replicated exactly what was happening in the hospital. We just did it for nothing. And then had the next recipients, and we compared the ICE heart, the esky heart, the Aussie heart, versus our rig heart. And what we saw was that this heart, the rig that we worked on in this special medical Gatorade, if you like, allowed the heart to start much better, protected the cells. So we worked through this for that time, and David McGiffin is a lovely fellow. He's Fernie Grove boy, Scottish mum, just putting it out there. David's a wonderful man. He was down in Melbourne, but he was very much, he's coming to retire, and this is his legacy. I said, we've got this idea. So he'd fly up every fortnight off his own dollar till about August, and then the COVID borders came down. I said, look, we're getting to the crunch. So he flew up, isolated for 2 weeks, then operated for 3 months, basically continuously. I think his wife was happy to just, on you go. And we operated, and long story short, they showed the data. So we then started human studies in Melbourne. Again, through COVID, it's been difficult teaching new surgical techniques on Zoom. So normally see one, do one, teach one is the medical mantra, but we have to teach on Zoom how to do this. And we have now done 7 transplants. One was done last night, I heard at 8 o'clock in Sydney. So these are hearts that would not be usable. These are recipients that wouldn't have received a heart. So we think we'll be able to use maybe 20% more hearts, which means 20% more people get this. But more than this, we think that the hearts that are used are working much, much better. Now we can't tell, but the feeling would be that these will last not 10 years or 15, they'll last 20 and 25. So we give more years to their life, but probably more importantly, more life to those years, so that they can do more, they can be more involved with their kids, they can go for climbs and swims and things like this. So really exciting that it's taken so long, but we're there and humans are starting to benefit. Only New South Wales and Victorian, so part humans.
So 2 hours, where you're at now in terms of your longevity and trying to get those hearts different places?
So the longest we've done, and it was a COVID problem of getting between the airports and carrying on, 7.5 hours, and the heart was just beautiful. They came off the table and the heart was just... So David did that procedure, and he's done more transplants than the rest of Australian surgeons put together, And he phoned me and he said, mate, I'm actually just getting goosebumps just now. He goes, this is, you know, a heart that's been dead for 4 hours or, you know, is really sick and it's sluggish. You have to give lots of drugs and put them in dialysis machines and leave them on ventilators, and they're in intensive care for weeks. They become deconditioned, they don't get to see their family, they get delirium, da, 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 da. This person was, the heart bang, up and had the breathing tube out the next morning talking to the family. So
that's all been happening during COVID. You mentioned the medical Gatorade that helps do that. You've always got away with words. You mentioned COVID. You described COVID as driving 120 kilometres an hour, blindfolded, down the highway with your mum and dad in the back seat of the car. Is that what it's been like?
It's been really easy for me in Queensland. And I haven't actually seen a COVID critically ill patient, and that's all credit to our geography, to the way that they've done the borders for us. It's annoying, and my mother is demanding I get there as soon as possible. But we haven't had, especially in Queensland, we've had very little. But what we did see was, as the chair of the Asia Pacific region in last January, we had been interested to looking up to see influenza. Why some people get a flu and they take 2 paracetamol and watch Netflix for a day or 2, and some people end up in intensive care, and we still see people die from influenza. So we had been primed that we thought the next flu, let's look at the genetic markers of why someone gets sick and someone, you know, doesn't play football very well, like yourself. And so we started getting phone calls early January from friends and our colleagues across the Asia Pac region saying, we don't know what to do. And it really was people just phoning or WhatsApping, I've got this patient, this bug's weird, their lungs aren't working, what have you tried? Oh, I tried this. Did it work? I think so. Okay. Which sounds terrifying to the non-medics, but this was a brand new disease that there were no books, there were no instruction manuals, and there were no data. So we had nothing to do, but we had a kind of responsibility, I think, to try and help those people in the middle of the fire.
So you have a remarkable network of contacts around the globe, which you've always had and developed more here. Mm. But at this time you decided that you could perhaps get that network together, yep. Something you call COVID critical. Yep. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's a pretty basic idea really. We were just getting lots of people coming to us with lots of questions, and because I was the president of the organisation, they thought, well, he'll know. He knew nothing, absolutely nothing. But we could just see all these data. People were talking about what they'd seen and what they'd seen, but there was no interconnection. So we said, well, whilst we're waiting for the studies and the trials, if we can bring these data points together from patients in China and Japan, Milan, etc., if we can bring it together, maybe we can start, if you imagine it as a jigsaw puzzle piece, 1 million, or we've now got 35 million data points sprinkled around the world, you can't actually see any picture. But if you bring the data points together, suddenly that jigsaw clicks, and you go, oh, and you see associations and you see patterns. So that's what we did. We basically created a group, COVID Critical. We met every Thursday night and then every Friday morning for the west coast of America and down that side of the world. On top of everything else, so we were, it sounds very organised, but it was just chaos in a stick. We were writing the slides as we're presenting the slides. We're having, there's 220 major hospitals. We've got Harvard online, she's got Johns Hopkins online, and I'm texting Jackie, there's 3 of us that kicked it off. Jackie, we forgot these slides, so he's making slides on another computer. I'm presenting slides. You know, it's the duck, you know, you're trying to look very calm. And we just, it was just a place, a kind of safe place, because the intensive care is the end stage in the hospital. There's no one else you can refer to. Once they're really, really sick, they come to intensive care, and then oh shit, you're it. So we're used to kind of having a plan, and this was a new disease that we just didn't have a plan. So we started sharing the data, which was the key aim, bringing it together and looking for patterns. But what also happened was on those calls, and I kept using this phrase, it was a cathartic confessional. It was people in the line of fire with no idea what to do, but wanting to make it happen. And it was, so we'd have Zimbabwe, Rwanda, the US, the UK, Germany, some of the richest countries and some of the poorest countries, just describing what they did and what was going on, what their issues were. And so many of the problems were the same, but also Zimbabwe, New York presented, and one night my friend, I think he's 42, 43, really fit marathon runner, a bit like myself, but not really. He's got 2 legs. And he had said, the New York Columbia Presbyterian, where all the American presidents go for the bypass surgery, he said, we're so full that if I get COVID and I need to go in the artificial lung, I'm too old. He was 42, he's a professor of intensive care, and they just said, we're awash. They had cooler trucks in the street as the morgues, because the morgues were just full. So you'd hear this, and then you'd speak to Zimbabwe on the same call. They were having a civil war. They hadn't paid the nurses or doctors for 3 or 4 months. They had 14 ventilators for 20 million people. My animal lab's got 20 ventilators. So this concept of the global citizen is a lovely concept, but it's not real. And the disparity between rich or poor and that we have to do, I think that's really highlighted. But the people are still trying to do the same thing. The mums love their children, the dads love their children, they're trying to do the right thing. But so then bit by bit, IBM, so I said, well, we need to gather this data and then provide it some way, not in a journal. It's got to be usable, it's got to be immediate, because this is happening. So we spoke to IBM and they said, can you make us something that works so that the clinician can pull it out on their smartphone? And they said, fine, what do you want, Professor? And I said, I don't know. I'm going to speak to people. So we gave them 20 clinicians from the rich and the poor countries, and they went backwards and forwards. It was great. We're probably all used to IT departments, that they all try and tell us what to do. These people stopped and listened. And I said, listen to what they need, whether it's Rwanda, whether it's Paris, whether it's wherever. And they went back and forward with what the clinicians, so it was co-developed with the clinicians, but with the ability of all the brilliant IBM people. And we created this dashboard where you can, you're at 3 in the morning and you're not sure what to do, so you can bring this up, and we've now got 16,000 patients, 35 million data points, and you can kind of say, 51-year-old bad footballer.
51.
You're looking good for it. Oxygen level 82, kidney function is, he's on these treatments, and it will create a plot of this. If we ventilate, this person are 90% likely to survive, they're likely to need dialysis, they're likely to need this, this and this. So it doesn't tell the clinician what to do, but it gives them an aggregate picture of global data. But it also gives you an idea of what we saw a lot of when we published on was the ethics of, you've got 2 people, you've got 1 ventilator. What do you do? That's a hard one, and in the rich countries we're not used to having that decision. The poorer countries have had to make these decisions the whole time. So we looked at the global perspective and the ethics of distributive justice, to say, well, if you've got someone that's been a criminal and someone that's been a school teacher, what do you do? Who gets the ventilator? So it's fascinating to see the different cultural perspectives that people put on it. And then through this, other people started sharing ventilators across boundaries and things like that. So now the Gates Foundation have got involved in Mindaroo. And so the dashboard is super duped, and then we'll start to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to do what's called federated learning. And then from this, we'll be able to see associations that if you treat people with this, it seems to work. Now that's just observational data, it's just what we're seeing, there's no intervention. But what it then works is as an escalator mechanism, that's the ground floor. We see an association, we then go to the next group, which is called REMAP-CAP, that did all the steroid studies, and say, it seems to be looking at these 35 million data points, this is something you should trial. Then you've got a hypothesis to go and test. So it becomes an escalator mechanism.
So how much did the variants of COVID change things? So you're going along, learning a lot, and all of a sudden there are variants. How different was that?
It is different. It's much more infective. The breakthrough rate might be a bit higher with Delta, but this is viruses. Every virus mutates. It's just what it happens. It's also, and it changes the intensive care to an extent. But what's more relevant with this was everyone needs to get vaccinated, and in the rich, well-off countries we can do it. So when I presented maybe a couple of weeks ago at some meeting, in the richer countries, 100 doses of vaccine had been given out per 100 people. At the same time, in the low middle income countries, it was 1.5 doses of vaccine per 100 people. So it's not just not fair, it's not decent, but it also means that becomes a variant factory. Because if you've got no vaccinations in there, each time the virus has changed, that's what they do, that's how they survive. That's why you get a different flu jab each year. So it's not just fair to vaccinate, it also protects us if we as a rich country are helping the poorer countries. And we've done that appallingly.
When the variants came, as part of your hookups, you had someone in Vietnam that had a problem with a British Airways pilot who was very ill. Can you talk about what happened there?
Yeah, it was. So we had these calls on the Thursday night and the Friday morning, and I've got, you should just make note, I've got 5 kids, so invariably the youngest one would wander through, having had a bath, dry, just dripping. I'm dry. Get towel on. And there's the chap that invented the ECMO machine and bypass, he's a lovely fellow called Bob Bartlett, and a small aside, Bob's like a rock star in the medical. No cardiac surgery would proceed except for what this man did in his 30s. And Bob was across in Brisbane a number of years ago when Tommy was about 3 or 4, and we picked Tommy up from Kindy, and he's got that, that just waking up post Kindy, and he wakes up, there's this old man beside him, who's if Bob goes anywhere in Asia, he gets autographs everywhere. So, hey Tommy, hi, my name's Bob. Are you Bob the Builder? To a man that's invented modern medicine, and his wife wanders in the front seat of the car, and he goes, no, I'm sorry, I have built some things. He goes, So Tommy and Bob have had this special relationship. So Bob's always online, and there's all these eminent people, but Bob is the man. So Bob always sees Tommy wandering across in a pair of undies or nothing, dripping wet, and he just, hey Tommy, Bob. Oh, hi Bob. Well, we'll just press pause on COVID for a little while. But we were on call, going back to the point, we were on call, and Vietnam did very, very well. Initially they just locked everything down. Amazing to see how different countries survive. So Vietnam, tiger economy, dependent on tourism, all stopped. So the poor people were having less food because there was less. So they then created rice ATMs. So instead of putting your card in a machine and doing this and getting some money, the poor people would go with a poly bag, and you'd press a button and you get an aliquot of rice for your daily living. It was a rice ATM machine. But they had Dr. True's, this wonderful young doctor that I know, and they had a patient, British Airways pilot, as you say, had flown in just before they closed the borders, became very, very sick, 35, 38, young, and he had to be ventilated, and he was Scottish, and they were just saying he's ventilated and he was going to have to go in this artificial lung machine, which is one of our big areas. So when your lungs don't work, we put the breathing tube in and we ventilate you. But the lungs with COVID become quite stiff, so they normally are like a dry sponge that's nice and bouncy, but with COVID they become like the green stuff that you put flowers in a church, you know, that foam, the hard stuff. As an altar boy, you used to stick your fingers in and then get told off for it. So they become really non-compliant and stiff, so if you ventilate them, they rupture. So if you imagine it's like a broken leg, we don't try and make them work harder, so we put 2 big pipes, garden hose, into either vein at the side of your leg, and we put an artificial lung. So you take 5 litres of blood every minute outside your body, removes the carbon dioxide and puts the oxygen back in. But you have to make the blood runny when it hits the plastic because it's not normal. So this patient had a clotting problem, and Dr. True was on the call with 200 other people on the call, Thomas, and she said, I've got this clotting problem, it's called HITS. And I don't know what to do, could you give us advice? And I said, well, I could, but Dr. Bartlett, are you still online? Yes, John, I'm online. Dr. Bartlett, you invented this whole science. Would you mind helping Dr. True? Because I'm maybe fit to tie your shoelaces, but that's it. He goes, it would be my honour. So here's this young lady in Vietnam doing an amazing job, her whole team did a great job, suddenly gets to meet someone online who invented everything since before she was born. And he met her each week on Zoom and guided her through. So this patient had the most expert management from True's team in Vietnam, but also from Bob and a number of others. So the patient did really well. They came off the bionic lung, they came off the breathing tube. And part of the thing had been that they told me he was a Celtic fan, which is my football team. And we got the breathing tube out, and it turned out he was a Motherwell fan. And I was like, you shouldn't have tried so hard. No, joking apart, it was just a lovely thing to see. No one interested in money, you know, time zones, war zones, doesn't matter. The people will come together in times. And that was one of the most amazing things, just to see how it was not, medics can be pretty super type A and it's me, and that all evaporated when this happened. Everyone was just in it together because we had to learn and do better.
You did a presentation by video for your ELSO conference recently with your fabulous Australian accent, which they'll show, but you also mentioned when you did that some papers that were coming up at that conference. And one of those was some findings on why some people get more sick from COVID than others.
Yep.
And you mentioned it before about the flu, but what have you found out about that?
So this was actually a great friend of mine at a genius man called Kenny Bailey, way ahead of me. So Kenny is in Edinburgh in the Roslin where they did Dolly the Sheep. And 2019 I was asked to go back and speak in Scotland, and I take one child each international trip. There's a fight to see who goes on each trip. They have to pass schoolwork, but then they're allowed on. So this was Scotland, so the youngster Tommy was with me on this trip, and I went up to speak in St Andrews, and Kenny had come up from Edinburgh to meet me. And we're at the dinner and people are chatting away, but Thomas is jet lagged, he's 7 or 8 at the time, and he actually fell asleep in the soup. So I was talking to Kenny, and he's got a Fraser melon, so you're really quite heavy into this. And Kenny's asking me questions about it, and I said, yeah. And he said, look, I need to take the wee man to bed. So I'll meet in the morning. So we met in the morning for breakfast. We talked about looking at the genetics of flu and come across to Australia. So November that year he came across. So this is January in St Andrews. Don't know if you've ever been there, home of golf. The wind cuts you in two. And Kenny came and stayed with us in Casuarina and said, oh, I love beaches. He said, when I saw you in January, the beach, I said, yeah, it was great, all the rivers were frozen. He said, oh, there was no hotel rooms that night. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'd planned to go back to Edinburgh because the wee man was asleep. I waited for breakfast. I said, so where did you stay? He said, I had a sleeping bag in my car, I went and slept on the beach. It was -6. It was -6, and he went, I said, the rivers were frozen. I remember throwing stones, because Thomas is an Australian kid's going, wow, look at that, bouncy water. So Kenny had slept at -6 so that he could have breakfast with us the next morning. So he's the master. He's published in Nature. So what he did was they got 5,000 patients, just a swab, and then get all their physiological data, and then look at their genetics. So there's 4 or 5 markers that determine whether you're going to get really sick with COVID, because 50% of people will not get that sick. The problem is you don't know, and that's why we have to vaccinate, not just for ourselves, but to protect the person next door to you who might get really sick. So to be able to determine who's going to get sick and then which genes are upregulated will then, through Kenny and other people's work, allow us to get new treatments as well. So that's a phenomenal piece of science work, and to be able to produce this in the middle of a pandemic is great credit, but that's the kind of passion that Kenny has. He's quite happy to sit and sleep at -4 on a beach.
So you're not that good for breakfast, are you?
No, that's right.
Queensland and COVID, we've seen what's happened down south. We've had unmasked cab drivers in Cairns, someone else a couple of days ago on the Gold Coast, an Uber driver. Why are we not seeing COVID cases in Queensland?
I think everyone's asking the same question, and I don't know that I know the answer. I think a massive component is all credit to the people doing the borders, and we locked down early, and looking across the world, if you don't lock down early, it's gone. So we locked down very, very early. It's been done well. Last year there's a whole pile of politics, and we should open, and then even that political side realised it's probably not the way to go. So I think Australia's done well because we're miles away from anywhere. We can do the borders very, very easily. People talk to me, is it the temperature? It's not. Brazil has been hammered, India has been smashed. So I don't think it's the temperature. I think we've just been incredibly lucky. And the whole thing is just, we need to get as many vaccinated as possible and then just open up. It does, I understand people have different views, but I think if you choose not to get vaccinated, anaphylaxis, etc., proper medical reasons, no problem. But if you decide not to get vaccinated, there is an argument, and this is inflammatory, if you decide not to get vaccinated, should you be allowed to go to the intensive care when you become sick? Because what's happened in the UK is the NHS has got now a waiting list that's blown out by 10 years. Because if you've got cancer or a heart disease and you need your operation, you can't get an intensive care bed because someone's there with COVID, which is okay, but if you've had the opportunity to get a vaccine and you're in an intensive care bed and the person that's done the right thing dies because of their colon cancer or their bypass being delayed, you have to think about that. So there's a lot of discussion. If once you say, I do not want to be vaccinated, that's fine, don't come to intensive care because Mrs. Smith or will have their care compromised by your choice. You can have your choice, but you have consequences with your choice.
And you still think it's inevitable that it does come to Queensland in
Yep.
numbers?
Yeah, and I think the thing with Queensland is it's, oh mate, she's right. Nah, she's the Southerners, mate. She's fine. It's Queensland. It's the digger spirit, mate. It's the digger spirit. You go, it's not the digger spirit, it's your genes. Nah, have you seen State of Origin? Come on. You kind of hear these things, really smart people, and you go, seriously? So I think one of the things, and Steve Hamilton's here, a fantastic ex-president of the AMA, we need a burden of disease. It sounds terrible, but people need to be harmed to know it's real. And again, this is where when we've been doing this COVID stuff, we're first to go out the door and get vaccinated because you could see the carnage and the chaos. You could see just lives torn apart, industries, economies are destroyed. But Queensland has not had that yet. Neither's Western Australia. So the argument is, how long do you hold off? Because the more people vaccinated, the better. But equally, until there is pain, and we saw this in Victoria, the vaccination rate was this, and then went to the 5th or 6th lockdown, and the vaccination rate was through the roof. So I think you need to, here you go, cancel football, cancel NRL, cancel rugby, and Queenslanders will go out and get vaccinated tomorrow. Jeez, not the footy. Well, there's a pandemic. Oh, no, there's a pandemic, but not the footy. I think there needs to be a consequence, and that's where people. But at the moment, look at this beautiful morning. We're all sitting having a lovely breakfast, and we've not seen the pain. It's something over there.
Now, that ELSO presentation you gave, you made people sit up and take notice because you spoke about COVID and observations, and then you said, but this is not the biggest medical emergency that we have.
Yep.
What happened next?
Well, COVID's a pandemic, and please God it'll go away, and I think it will, and it's all credit to the people across the world. We're trying to help a tiny little bit. But COVID will go away. It's happened before, the Spanish flu, Ebola, it'll go away. But I think the thing that I get most worried about is the climate change. And I think it's a medical emergency, it's not a political thing. We have got a vaccine for COVID, but there will be no vaccine for climate change. Pope Francis had said some cracking stuff, very proud of the way he speaks about it. I think one of his lines was, correct me if I get this wrong, but it's we're destroying this house that we've been invited into for our lifetime, and we're going to leave the house a mess, and suffer little children to come unto me, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We're going to give our children a mess. So I went through the science. It was delivered to a lot of American doctors as well, and it's quite a political thing over there. I just think it's very basic science. Anyone that's useful scientifically, the data's clear. It's been, in the last 5 years, since 2015, we've had 5 of the hottest years, over 100 years. The subsoil dies, so the number of mammalian species becoming extinct each year. It just means whatever we're leaving our children is unfair, and so much less than what we were left. The amount of green space, the amount of animals, the differences in the environment. And I just, at the end of it, I said, we've done an amazing job. Scientists, nurses, cleaners, people looking after the trains, things have done an amazing job. And in 30 years or 40 years' time, when our children look back, they might give us an A+ for what we've done with COVID. But if they start to look at the climate change, we're going to get an F-, and that's going to be the thing that will still be with them, and it will accelerate and accelerate and accelerate.
A lot of the medical journals from around the world came together, didn't they, for the Glasgow talks that are upcoming. What happened with that? So they came together to present some argument to the Glasgow?
Yeah, well, I think that it's been politicised, and I don't think it's political. In a similar way that COVID in America has been politicised, right-wing say you don't need a vaccine. I don't understand. No one becomes political about staphylococcus. It's just a boring old bacteria. Oh, you get staph, you take some antibiotics. Somehow a virus becomes political. Oh, so you're you're a liberal, you get vaccinated. What? No. So, but in America, the climate change has become politicized, pseudo-politicized, and it shouldn't be. You just need data. Whatever the answer of the data is the data. So the medical journals all came together and just assessed all the data and said, this is accelerating. Once it goes past 1.5 degrees, it's no route back. We can do this. We have to do this. People are dying. We're working with NASA at the moment. We've got all the Australian data, Brazilian, Singapore, and I think the US, looking at so when the bushfires happened, there's a massive increase in heart attacks, a massive increase in admissions with lung disease. And now we're looking at global weather patterns and then looking at the discharge post-hospital. And it's changing. So it's just very, very difficult because it's such a big picture. But all the journals came together and said, no longer political. This is just basic science. Forget politicians. We need to do something more. So it will be interesting to see how Mr. Morrison goes in Glasgow. Glaswegians are moderately direct about how they feel. So I think that's perhaps some of his reticence going across there, because he will get a Glaswegian, "Hey, you're stupid. Put your coal away." So he will have a rough old trot in Glasgow, I hope. Sorry.
We're going to turn over for questions from the floor, so if you've got a question, please raise your hand and we'll get a microphone. Before that, I see the TGA has approved the booster shot for COVID if you've had 2 shots, and Pfizer is the one they've approved. When do you need a booster shot?
So the data's just coming in thick and fast. But again, it's brilliant. It's just great data science that the people across the world are doing. So Israel looked at this and they said between 6 or 7 months afterwards. There's different ways that immunity works, your antibody, but also your T cell stays dormant and will come back up. But on the triple, on the 3rd shot, your immunity gets another boost. And we don't know, it might be each year you get a booster shot. That's what we do with flu's not a booster shot, it's a different variant. But they will probably be Pfizer's with tweaks, and this will continue for a while until. So between 6 and 8 months, I think is what I think. Frontline workers, aged care health workers, and at-risk immunocompromised are first cab off the rank. Again, Stephen might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but 6 or 7 months, and it's happening in the States, and it's happened in Israel already. It's interesting though. I mean, it's a pandemic, but some things are standard across the world. My sister's a school teacher in Scotland, and the kids they have to do a lateral flow test each day. So and if they're COVID positive and they've been vaccinated, they'll become sick, but not that sick because they have been vaccinated. So the children have now learned how to fake a positive COVID test. If anyone's interested, you perfume or lemon juice, you spray it on your lateral flow, you can get a day off school. There you go. My nephew's, "Harry, I know you're a doctor and everything, but do you know how to get a day off school? Spray perfume or lemon juice." So there you go. So the boosters will come as soon as possible. Again, it is a bit, it's important, we should do it, but it is a bit galling that there's 6 million AstraZeneca shots that are running out of date in Australia, and at Papua New Guinea's just there. You know, you could swim across and give it to them, and we haven't, and that's, I think, an indictment on us. The long COVID symptoms after 8 or 12 weeks, 30%-ish are getting this. We've got a study called Aftercore. So this is Joe Blow that goes to the hospital and might not be that sick. So there's about 30%-ish. We are now looking at the intensive care patients that go in with COVID who are really critically unwell. So if they're sicker because of COVID, the likelihood, we haven't got the answer yet, the likelihood is their long COVID will probably be worse, but we don't know, it's a new disease. But what we're seeing from the patients across in Latin America and the States, we bring them back for a 6-minute walk test. How far can you walk in 6 minutes? What's your oxygen level, etc. So many of them are still 25-year-olds. We're not talking older people. We're talking fit and well football players. 25-year-olds are unable to walk to the clinic from their bus stop. We have had kids, Michigan, heart transplanted. The heart's got smashed by COVID and just never recovered. So it's going to take us a while to get the actual answer. We're doing a 2-year study across, I think, 6 continents in 33 countries. I think what we'll see, but we don't have the final data, this is going to have a massive repercussion of chronic health, where the lungs, like I said, are no longer nice and bouncy. The oxygen levels drop off. They can't do as much as they can. It's a little bit like when you do a burn back on a farm, you light the grass and the fire goes away, but if you walk over it in the next morning, there's still indolent heat just burning underneath the roots. I think this is what long COVID will have, a slow burning inflammatory excess, which will cause multi-system dysfunction. And again, that's one of the things people say about vaccination, dying alive. There's worse things than being dead. There's 25-year-olds that can't go to work, can't get out of bed, can't swallow properly, have had strokes. So I'm going to be fascinated, but I think it's going to be significant repercussions. And it's one of the 25-year-olds, well, that's repercussions for the next 40 or 50 years. They are at risk, they're much less at risk. The study in the States was, so the States has just approved 5 to 12, and again, we just need to be driven by data. We need to get good data, clean data, and the answer is what the answer is. So the data is now coming out that 5 to 12 is safe. COVID is still in the top 5 causes of deaths in kids last year. So not many of them become really sick, but enough of them become sick, and a child dying unnecessarily is not acceptable. So I'm pretty certain, and again, Stephen might have more data than I, but I'm pretty certain it'll come here relatively quickly. It's been approved in the States, the data's there, publication came out in the New England Journal. So Tommy, you've heard me talk about 11, and he'll be vaccinated the first day it comes out, and I've vaccinated the rest of them too. So from my side of things, I think the data's clear enough that I trust it from my son. And they will infect people. You know, kids, get teachers here, you know, telling a kid to socially distance. The concepts, you know, and that's my 25-year-old. So regardless what Mr. Morrison says, my mum says I'm coming home in February, so I think we will be able to travel, and I think we have to be able. Europe is travelling. Europe's back travelling. They have the vaccine passports. You won't go into a club or a pub or a restaurant unless you're vaccine secure. Is the worst over? No idea. I mean, there's now a Delta 1 variant, but this is just what happens. It's what viruses do. They just mutate. I think we'll see new vaccinations with tweaks built in, like the same with the flu vaccine. But again, so I hope it's over, please God. But I had a great chance to listen to one of the Pfizer guys who'd been involved, not as a business kind of guy. They signed, this is the speed at which science, if it's allowed to go, it can just change things. I had nothing to do with this, but they signed the deal on March 2020 with BioNTech to work on this new vaccine, signed it on March 16th or something. And in November 26th, they've got the first shots into people's arms after the study. So to give you an idea, it took 20 years to get a hepatitis B vaccine. It took like 100 years to get a typhoid vaccine. It took them 226 days to develop a vaccine that's changed the face of the world, that's allowed us to go back to Ireland and Scotland and things like this. So I think it's phenomenal. And just to make a pitch, we were chatting this morning about the Dolphins and how much government money is going to go into the next NRL club. If there's some government people out there, put the money into medical research. You're going to change the world. You're going to save your mum's life and get us back to see our mums and dads in Scotland and Ireland. So ivermectin is a treatment for parasites, and it works on humans for parasites. COVID's a virus, so it's a completely different. It's like saying if you're good at football, then you're going to be good at lacrosse. It's entirely different species. So it works on parasites, and in the test tube, it will kill the COVID virus. And there's 2 fantastic scientists in Melbourne, I was reading this story about them. They had done this initial study looking at COVID in a test tube, and you chuck some ivermectin and it kills it. But it was a massive dose, and it caused all sorts of other problems. But somehow someone got onto this concept, well, it kills the virus in a test tube. So does bleach. And our fantastic Mr. Trump fan, but you're not going to inject bleach. And it's the same with ivermectin. So the data at the moment is there's been a multitude of studies. None of them have come out positive. Ivermectin, people are buying, there's not enough for the parasitic infections in the third world, because Westerners that won't read data have decided, because they've seen it on Facebook, then it must be right. The other 6 million studies are clearly wrong. Their mate's seen it on Facebook, so that's the way it works. There will be another study. A friend of mine, Alistair Nichols, is going to lead it, but there are no data at all currently to support ivermectin of a high quality study. There are still people that believe in it, so that's why the next study, and again, it shouldn't be political. If there's still a question, let's do that study. But you've got 6.5 billion people have been vaccinated versus 226 and a lost dog. I still don't quite understand why people want to believe in this anti-science. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration on America, on their Twitter page, is normally very formal, very scientific. And last week I just saw their best tweet ever, and it says, "Come on y'all, you ain't horses." That was it. "Come on y'all, you ain't horses." And I just thought, there you go, you're not a horse. I know some donkeys, but not horses.
Time for one more question.
Great question, and I don't know the answer. I've often thought about it too. So some people get nothing, and some people become really quite unwell, and occasionally people have ended up in hospital, and you've heard about the thing where your platelet counts and you get clots, vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia. We don't know, but in the same way there's a genetic response to infection, there will probably be a genetic response to vaccination as well. So, I think the thinking is if you get really quite unwell, with the vaccine, your immune system's upregulated even more. But there's no data, so I can't give you an answer on it, but it's a good question. People are monitoring antibody levels, so once your second dose, the Sinovac, the Chinese vaccine, it doesn't work. It's 50% effective versus the 95s and 97s of the AstraZeneca. Excuse me, Sinovac I wouldn't take, but the other ones, your antibodies do rise. We can't see anything, but I think it'll be a fascinating question. And again, with 6.5 billion people, we will find out if the government stops giving money to the dolphins and starts giving it to medical research. Can I finish on that one?
Do what you want with the dolphins.
It's true.
John, it's always great to have you here. As I said, you were backed by popular demand. And today's been another a great talk, and to listen to your insights and your time. I'm always petrified talking to you that your phone's rung 10 times and there's someone sick. But thanks so much for this morning, for coming along, and all the best with your continued research. Can you please thank Professor John Fraser?